This show in no way whatsoever condones or promotes any crime or behavior that harms children or anyone else. This program is educational and preventative. It is not a substitute for professional therapy. Unless otherwise stated, neither the host nor any guest is a credentialed professional of any kind. If you feel you need mental health treatment, please seek a professional. Welcome to Authenticity Redefined, Round Zero.
Police are accusing a former public defender of sexually assaulting a child.
Las Vegas math middle school teacher accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old girl.
County Fire Lieutenant and his wife are accused of sexual activity with a teenage girl.
Pastor charged with raping a young girl. They're worried he may have molested even more children.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground now! Get on the ground!
They say the former cop not only used his badge to gain the trust of children and parents, but used it to hide his alleged crimes. And despite red flags,
we do not tolerate this crime.
These are among the sickest tops of criminals.
Stop it! Stop it, you're enemy! Stop it, you're enemy!
Stop the madness.
What makes criminality so difficult to treat is that it is programmed to defend itself against any and all accountability. Thoughts become attached to feelings, and in time, feelings manifest behaviors. Criminality is fueled by feelings, mainly selfish desires that can surgically cut off fears, love, and consideration towards others. A person operating within this framework acquires an antisocial and irresponsible internal sense of power, control, and excitement. Relinquishing this delusional state of mind is virtually impossible without influence from the outside world, as criminality is a form of addiction. The internal workings of criminality operate like a dormant virus multiplying inside the mind. Only when the infestation has matured, strengthened, and spread uncontrollably will it rear its ugly head. Then, seemingly without warning, a child is molested, someone is raped, a family destroyed, a community shook. Those closest to the victim or the offender attempt to go back to find a rational explanation, trying desperately to understand how such horror is possible. Unfortunately, questioning an offender who spent possibly years in closed channel is futile without the proper skill set. Even when an offender voluntarily discloses or confesses their crimes, it does not guarantee an open channel of communication. They may employ a series of diversionary tactics, justifications, and lies on purpose, but also because they've developed the habit of closed channel thinking for so long, they may not even realize they're not being completely open and honest. Why? Well, the simple answer is fear. Fear of losing the power and the control and the excitement they've cultivated in their mind for so long. But also a fear of facing the truth, of facing the world, that what they've built in their minds is wrong. The good news is that closed channel thinking and criminality as a whole, specifically sex crimes, can be corrected when the right chemicals are poured in. To do this, we must go back. We must understand how the study of criminality merged with mental health. This is not the narrative you're being told. The media, politicians, and law enforcement want you to believe that all sex crimes are committed by sick and twisted perverts that must be locked away for good because there is no way to correct it. See, the truth is, they don't know how to correct it because they're blinded with hatred and rage. They care more about punishment than prevention. They can't see through the cloud of emotions. Let's look at the facts, and maybe logic and reason will bring clarity to this issue. If sex offenders are all vicious, predatory monsters that can never change and must be locked away, severely punished, and publicly outed for the safety of the community, then once incarcerated, there should be signs of this predatory nature in prison as well. Are there any studies that follow sex offenders after arrest and conviction that shows behavior during incarceration? Well, yes, there is. Research consistently shows that as a group, people convicted of sex offenses often have better institutional adjustment than general prison population. For example, they have lower disciplinary infraction rates. Multiple studies find sex offenders receive fewer disciplinary reports overall compared to non-sex offenders. They tend to follow rules more, get into fewer fights, and have lower rates of violent misconduct. They have higher program participation. Sex offenders are more likely to enroll in and complete educational, vocational, and treatment programs. They frequently participate as tutors or facilitators, helping others with GEDs or life skills. Very low rates of prison sexual misconduct. Sexual offending inside prison by convicted sex offenders is relatively rare. Most prison sexual misconduct is committed by non-sex offenders. The Bureau of Justice Statistics and other correctional studies show sex offenders often have lower general misconduct rates while incarcerated. They are frequently described as model inmates in many facilities, especially protective management or treatment-focused units. If they were all the monsters and predators portrayed in media, we would expect high rates of ongoing predatory behavior in prison, assaults on vulnerable inmates, constant rule breaking, etc. But that's not what the data shows for the majority. Why? Why is this happening? Well, because the 93% of sex offenders offended in specific situational or relational contexts. For example, stress or impulse control, opportunity or thinking errors, rather than having a predatory pattern. Prison removes many of those triggers and provides structure which they often respond to positively. What this shows is that many sex offenders are capable of positive adjustment and reform when given the right conditions and tools. So, are there real monsters? Who are they? Well, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, BJS, and the Department of Corrections, inmates convicted of violent person offenses such as homicide, assault, robbery, are disproportionately responsible for assaults on staff and serious inmate-on-inmate violence. According to the BJS, people released for sex offenses actually have lower overall recidivism rates than most other categories of offenders. After release from prison, only approximately 7.7% of sex offenders commit another crime. Yet those who commit other crimes, such as robbery, assault, or drug crimes, have an 84% recidivism rate. If sex offenders were all dangerous predators who couldn't control themselves, we'd see much higher rates of reoffending and institutional violence. Instead, the data shows the opposite for them. So what does this all mean? It means that we have a little breathing room. We can take the time to reassess how we approach this issue and start a change towards prevention. We must recalibrate. If there is a more reasonable and logical way forward, we must take that path. We must elevate our collective consciousness, because right now, we aren't even on a path. We're lost in the woods. We aren't protecting kids, yet swear that we are. Our consciousness is rapidly debasing, and we have no choice than to change. For the sake of children, yes, but for the sake of our humanity as well, because we're not making progress. We're going backwards. Let me take you back for a minute so you can understand where this work actually comes from. For most of human history, if you committed a crime, especially a serious one, the response was simple and brutal. You were either thrown in a dungeon, tortured, executed, or in many cultures, people believed you were possessed by demons or evil spirits. There wasn't much interest in why someone did what they did. The focus was punishment, pure and simple, an eye for an eye. That started to slowly change in the mid-1800s, especially in England. As police departments became more organized, investigators began looking for motive. We wanted to understand why a person committed the crime. But even then, the basic assumption was still that the offender knew exactly what they were doing. They knew right from wrong. Mental health wasn't really part of the conversation yet. If you committed the crime, you were held fully responsible. At the same time this was happening in law enforcement, the medical and psychological communities were starting to look at crime through a completely different lens. Doctors and early psychiatrists began arguing that some people might not be fully responsible for their actions because of mental illness. This eventually led to major legal changes. In 1843, the Macnaghten Rule was established in England after a man named Daniel Macnaghten tried to assassinate the Prime Minister, but ended up killing his secretary instead. The court ruled that if a person was so mentally ill that they didn't know what they were doing or didn't know it was wrong, they could be found not guilty by reason of insanity, what we now call NGRI. This was a huge shift. For the first time, the law officially recognized that mental health could play a role in criminal behaviors. Once that door was open, different explanations started fighting for dominance. Three main theories of causation emerged. The organic view said crime came from something physically wrong with the brain or body, maybe genetics, brain damage, or some kind of biological defect. The social view argued that crime was mostly caused by environment, poverty, broken homes, bad neighborhoods, lack of opportunity. The psychoanalytical view, heavily influenced by Freud, said crime came from unconscious conflicts, repressed trauma, or deep psychological issues that the person themselves often didn't even understand. For decades, these three theories battled it out in courtrooms, universities, and treatment centers. Everyone was trying to figure out the causes of crimes. These causation controversies all had what seemed to be strong evidence to support their theories, but also weaknesses that made them inconclusive. For example, the social view argued that a person's criminality could be traced to living in a bad neighborhood. But how many people live in bad neighborhoods that don't commit crimes? In fact, an argument can be made that only a minority of people in so-called bad neighborhoods commit crimes. Many people use their struggles as stepping stones to achieve responsible, productive lives. The same inconsistency can be seen in all three causation theories. When Dr. Samuel Yochelson first started working with criminals at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, he did what most psychologists were trained to do. He used traditional therapy. He listened. He tried to understand their childhoods. He tried to build rapport and help them gain insight into why they did what they did. And it didn't work. In fact, it backfired. You see, traditional psychology works pretty well when you're dealing with a regular person who's struggling with depression, anxiety, or trauma. You sit with them. You show empathy. You help them explore their feelings. You give them space to talk. And slowly, they start to understand themselves better and make changes. But when you try that same approach with someone who's deep in closed channel thinking, it becomes a game. The criminal doesn't use that space to get better. He uses it to run game. He manipulates the therapist. He twists his words. He plays the victim. He makes excuses. He tells stories that make him look better than he really is. And because the therapist is trained to be non-judgmental and empathetic, the criminal walks out of every session feeling smarter, more justified, and more convinced that he can keep doing what he's doing. Yochelson saw this happening over and over. Traditional therapy was not only failing, it was actually making some of these men more skilled at manipulation. That's when everything changed. Yochelson and his colleague, Dr. Samenow, realized they had to throw out the old rulebook. They stopped being soft. They stopped trying to be everyone's friend in the therapy room. Instead, they became direct. They became stern. They started calling out the criminal thinking in real time. When a man tried to minimize what he did, they called it out. When he tried to blame his wife, his childhood, the system, or bad luck, they shut it down. When he used any of the 18 manipulative tactics, and believe me, they used all of them, Yochelson and Samenow would stop the session and point it out immediately. They didn't let it slide. They didn't let the man run the room. They understood something critical. You cannot treat closed channel thinking with open channel methods. You have to be willing to tell the truth even when the person doesn't want to hear it. This was the beginning of a completely different way of working with criminal minds. Instead of asking, why did you do it? It started focusing on, how do you think? It started identifying the specific thinking errors and patterns that kept these men stuck and dangerous. And that work became the foundation for everything we're talking about in this podcast. That's exactly what we're doing. We're going to teach you how to apply these methods. Disclosers and interveners will learn to identify, correct, and deter the great massive ice below the surface to prevent sexual crimes. You'll learn how to open the channel, disclosing fully and honestly. You'll learn how to receive criticism gracefully and how to develop the habit of balanced self-criticism. Interveners will learn how to identify manipulative tactics that keep a person in closed channel and help them, guide them towards open channel communication. So as we wrap up today, I want you to sit with this. Understanding where these thinking errors come from is the first real step toward breaking them. But there's another piece that's just as important, and we're going to dig into that next time. In episode 5, we're going to talk about institutionalization, that deep emotional and psychological stagnation that often starts in childhood and keeps people trapped in closed channel thinking for decades. It's almost like a form of psychological retardation that freezes emotional growth at a very young age, and it explains so much about why some people keep making the same destructive choices over and over. You're not going to want to miss this. Until then, I want you to start paying attention to your own thinking this week. When you catch yourself making excuses, minimizing, or blaming others, stop for a second. That's closed channel trying to run the show. This work isn't easy, but it's necessary. We need to stop the madness. Thank you for listening. If this episode hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The conversation has to start somewhere. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, take care.